The massive courtroom knew soul-buzzed with nervous energy as dozens of hopeful students from across the galaxy waited for their fate. Towering crystal walls stretched up toward a domed ceiling that showed the swirling nebulae of distant stars. Minho adjusted his position in his neural interface chair, the soft blue glow of its hover systems keeping him comfortable despite his condition. His legs didn't work like others. But his mind burned brighter than any star in the galaxy, Squeezed his shoulder from where she stood behind him. "You've got this, little brother," she whispered, though her voice carried worry. She had seen how the other species looked at humans in this place, the Dominion officials with their tall, silver forms and cold eyes. The Zephyrian delegates with their multiple arms gesturing dismissively, even the peaceful Arconian seemed to doubt humanity's place here. Judge Kaler stepped onto the floating platform that served as his bench. The Dominion leader stood nearly 8 feet tall, his metallic skin gleaming under the courtroom's artificial suns. His species had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 1,000 years, and he carried that authority like a weapon. Forearms moved in precise patterns as he activated the holographic displays showing each applicant's file. "We begin today's proceedings for admission to the Galactic Engineering Academy." Kaler's voice boomed through translation devices, the most prestigious institution in known space, where only the finest minds shape the future of galactic civilization. Minho watched as other applicants were called forward, a brilliant cetacean whose aquatic suit bubbled with excitement as she demonstrated her mastery of quantum mechanics. Twin Vorthan engineers who projected complex blueprints of starship engines that could cross galaxies in weeks instead of months. Each species seemed to have something that made them special, something that made them worthy. Then came the humans. The first was Dongyan, a young man from Earth's Mars colonies. His presentation on terraforming technology was flawless, his calculations perfect. But Judge Kaler barely glanced at the holographic models of transformed worlds. "Adequate," Kaler said with a wave of one metallic hand. "But humans have already shown their limitations in large-scale planetary engineering. Next," Soman stepped forward next. "A research on bioneural networks that could link organic and artificial intelligence seamlessly." She had spent 5 years developing technology that could revolutionize how all species interfaced with their spacecraft and computers. The presentation was brilliant, drawing impressed murmurs from several alien observers. Kaler's response was swift and cutting. "Interesting toys, but hardly the breakthrough work we expect from Academy students. Humans consistently overestimate their contributions to galactic science, one by one. Human after human presented incredible innovations only to be dismissed." Minho felt his sister's hand tighten on his shoulder as they watched dreams being crushed with casual cruelty. The judge's bias wasn't even hidden anymore. Finally, Minho's name echoed through the vast chamber. The neural interface chair hummed softly as it carried him forward, its anti-gravity field keeping him steady. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him from the gallery above, representatives from dozens of worlds watching this moment. Kaler's expression shifted to something that might have been discussed as he reviewed Minho's file. "A human with genetic defects seeks admission to our most prestigious academy." His voice carried across the courtroom like a weapon. "Tell me, young human, what possible contribution could someone in your condition make to galactic engineering?" The words hit like physical blows, but Minho had faced worse. He activated his own holographic display, showing theoretical frameworks for faster-than-light communication that didn't require the massive relay stations currently connecting the galaxy. "Honored Judge," Minho said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I believe that limitations often force us to find better solutions. My condition has taught me to think differently about problems." Kaler laughed, a sound like grinding metal that made several species in the gallery wince. "Think differently. You mean think like a crippled human instead of a proper engineer? Several Dominion officials joined his laughter. Young creature, your species has contributed nothing significant to galactic civilization in 3 centuries. You build slow ships, develop primitive weapons, and your medicine barely keeps you alive past a century. The judge gestured to the other applicants. Look round you. See beings who can process information at quantum speeds, who live for millennia, accumulating knowledge, who were born to understand the fundamental forces of the universe. His forearms spread wide in a mocking gesture. And then there are humans, short-lived, limited, and in your case, physically broken. Una started to stand in the gallery. Her face flushed with anger, but Minho caught her and shook his head slightly. Getting emotional now would only prove Kaller's point. Your application is denied. Kaler announced without even reviewing Minho's work properly. The Galactic Engineering Academy exists to train the universe's finest minds, not provide charity to inferior species, especially not to defective examples of those species. The gavel came down with finality that echoed through the chamber. Round them, Ilian students celebrated their acceptances while the humans sat in stunned silence. But Minho just smiled quietly as his chair carried him back to where Una waited. The judge had made a mistake that would echo across the galaxy. The cramped apartment on New Seoul's lower levels felt like a prison after the grandeur of the Galactic Tribunal. Minho's neural chair glided silently through the narrow hallway as Una slammed the door behind them. The sound echoed off the metal walls of their modest home. Built from repurposed starship hulls like most human housing in the outer colonies, that arrogant piece of scrap metal, Una muttered, pacing back and forth. Did you see how he looked at you? Like you were some kind of broken toy. Minho said nothing as his chair carried him toward the back room that served as his workshop. The space was barely larger than a closet, but he had transformed it into something special. Holographic displays flickered to life as he entered, showing complex mathematical equations that seemed to dance in the air like living things. Circuit boards from old mining equipment covered every surface, connected by cables that snaked across the ceiling. I need to work, he said quietly, already lost in thought. Una started to protest. But she knew that look. When Minho retreated into his calculations, the rest of the universe ceased to exist. She left him alone with his numbers and his dreams. Hours passed. The equations grew more complex, spreading across multiple displays until the tiny room glowed with mathematical fire. Minho's fingers moved across his neural interface, manipulating variables that most beings couldn't even comprehend. He was close to something big, something that would change everything. The door chimed softly. Jaewon stood in the hallway, his maintenance uniform still dirty from his shift at the spaceport. As Minho's oldest friend, he was one of the few people allowed into the workshop, heard about what happened at the tribunal. Jaewon said, settling into the room's only chair. That judge sounds like a real. He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had fallen on the holographic displays, and his jaw dropped open. Jaewon wasn't a scientist, but he had worked around enough alien technology to recognize something extraordinary. When he saw it, Minho, he whispered, "What is this?" The equations floating in the air weren't just complex, they were elegant, beautiful. They described relationships between space, time, and energy that connected every force in the universe. Jaewon had seen similar work before, during his time maintaining the massive computers that the Dominion scientists used for their research. But this was different. This was complete. The unified field equations, Minho said simply, as if he hadn't just casually mentioned solving the greatest scientific puzzle in galactic history. I've been working on them for 3 years. Jaewon's face went pale. These equations, the Dominion has been trying to solve them for centuries. They've got teams of their best minds working on it right now. He stood up, moving closer to the displays. If you've actually solved this, I have, Minho said with quiet confidence. I can prove it. Meanwhile, 3 sectors away on the diplomatic station orbiting Nusul, Sayin was having the worst day of her career. The young human diplomat had spent months preparing for today's meeting with the Galactic Education Council, hoping to address the declining acceptance rates for human students across the galaxy. The council chamber was a marvel of alien architecture, with floating platforms ranged in a complex spiral that let each species observe the others from their preferred angle. Sayin sat at the human platform, far below the elevated positions of the major powers. The statistics are concerning, she said, projecting her data onto the chamber's central display. Human acceptance rates have dropped by 60% over the past decade. Despite improved test scores and qualifications, Councillor Vexov, the Dominion barely looked up from his own display. Perhaps human applicants simply aren't meeting the higher standards we've implemented, higher standards that somehow don't affect other species. Sayin challenged. We have students scoring in the top percentiles who are being rejected, while others with lower scores are accepted. The Arconian representative, Velshin, shifted uncomfortably. Unlike the Dominion, the Arconians had always been fair to humans. These disparities are troubling. Perhaps we should investigate. Investigation is unnecessary, Vex said smoothly. The selection process is completely transparent. All species are evaluated equally. But Suin had been a diplomat long enough to recognize the lie. As the meeting continued, she quietly accessed the chamber's data networks through her tablet. What she found made her blood run cold. Hidden in the bureaucratic maze of application processing, she discovered coded instructions. Human applications were being flagged and sent to special review boards composed entirely of Dominion officials. The bias wasn't accidental. It was systematic, deliberate, and had been going on for years. Worse, she found communications between Dominion officials discussing the human problem. They saw humanity's growing technological capabilities as a threat to their dominance. The solution was simple: keep humans out of advanced education and research positions. Let them remain useful but never powerful. Minho's case wasn't isolated. It was part of a galaxy-wide effort to keep humanity in its place. That evening, Sayin's secure communicator chimed with an urgent message from her assistant on Nusol. There were rumors spreading through the spaceport about a human engineer who had made some kind of breakthrough. The maintenance crews were talking about equations that could revolutionize space travel. She pulled up the transit schedules. The next transport to Nusol left in 2 hours. Something told her that this mysterious engineer and the Dominions conspiracy were about to collide in a way that would shake the galaxy to its core. Back in his workshop, Minho was making final adjustments to his calculations when Jaewon burst through the door again. This time with excitement written across his face. I've been asking round, Jaewon said breathlessly. The Dominion research station in this system. They're working on the same equations you just solved. They've got a team of 50 scientists and a quantum computer the size of a building. Minho looked up from his work, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And they're not even close to a solution. Jaewon grinned. You just beat the greatest minds in the galaxy using spare parts and stubbornness. The neural interface chair hummed softly as Minho turned to face his friend. Jaewon, I think it's time the galaxy learned what humans are really capable of. The Galactic Science Council's emergency session had been called for the first time in 50 years across the galaxy. The most brilliant minds from hundreds of species gathered in the massive space station that orbited the galactic core. The reason was simple. Someone had just turned everything they knew about physics upside down. Dr. Kethva, the Dominion's chief scientist, stood before the assembly with four of his arms trembling slightly. His species prided themselves on their intellectual superiority, but the equations floating in the holographic display before them made him feel like a child trying to understand starship engineering. The submission came through our anonymous research portal 3 days ago. He announced to the packed chamber, "We have verified the mathematics 17 times. The equations are not only correct, they're revolutionary. The unified field equations hung in the air like a work of art, their elegant simplicity hiding the incredible complexity of what they represented: energy, matter, space, and time were all connected in ways that no one had ever imagined. The implications were staggering. If these equations are applied practically," Dr. Kether continued, his voice growing quieter, "we could build starships that travel between galaxies in days instead of millennia. We could generate enough energy to power entire star systems from devices no larger than a personal transport." The chamber erupted in excited chatter. Representatives from the crystalline Velthari species chimed like musical instruments as they discussed the possibilities. The gaseous nebula collective swirled with new patterns of thought. Even the ancient eternal archivists, who rarely showed emotion, were glowing brighter with interest. But on Earth's moon, in a modest teaching facility, someone else was staring at the same equations with a very different expression. Dr. Hyunwoo had been reviewing the galactic news feeds when the story broke. As a former professor who had taught human students for over 30 years, he recognized exceptional work when he saw it. More importantly, he recognized the style. Impossible. He whispered to himself, adjusting his reading glasses. But the more he studied the equations, the more certain he became. The mathematical approach, the creative shortcuts, the way complex problems were broken down into elegant solutions. He had seen this exact style before. 3 years ago, in his advanced physics class, there had been a student who solved problems differently than anyone else. While other students attacked equations with brute force, this one found unexpected pathways through the mathematics. The student's name was Minho, and he had been forced to drop out when his family moved to New Seoul. Dr. Hyunwoo's hands were shaking as he opened his secure communication terminal. If he was right, then humanity had just produced the greatest scientific breakthrough in galactic history, and the galaxy didn't even know it. Back on New Seoul, Minho was completely unaware of the chaos his anonymous submission had caused. He was too busy turning his equations into reality. The workshop had been transformed into something that looked like organized madness. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting power cells salvaged from old mining equipment, crystalline matrix cores from decommissioned Dominion computers hummed with borrowed energy. "Hand me that plasma coupling," Minho called to Yuna, who was balancing precariously on a ladder while connecting fiber optic cables to the ceiling. "Which one?" she called back. "You've got 17 different types of coupling in this mess. The blue one that's humming." "They're all humming." Jaewon looked up from where he was carefully calibrating a quantum resonance chamber built from parts he had borrowed from his work at the spaceport. "Maybe we should have started with something smaller," he suggested. "Like a flashlight that bends space-time. Where's the fun in that?" Minho grinned, making adjustments to his neural interface. The prototype device taking shape in the center of the room looked like something that had been assembled by a mad scientist, which, considering the circumstances, wasn't far from the truth. The device itself was about the size of a large desk, but its potential was unlimited. If Minho's calculations were correct, it could manipulate the fundamental forces that held the universe together. On its lowest setting, it might be able to move small objects through folded space. On its highest setting, well, they would have to be very careful about the highest setting. Theoretical question. Yuna said as she climbed down from the ladder. What happens if this thing doesn't work the way you think it will? Best case scenario, nothing happens and we're back where we started, Minho replied. Running final diagnostic checks on the device's central processing unit, and worst case scenario, we accidentally tear a hole in the fabric of space-time and destroy the solar system. Yuna and Jaewon both stopped what they were doing and stared at him. Kidding, Minho said quickly. Probably. Meanwhile, the galaxy was going insane trying to figure out who had submitted the breakthrough equations. The Dominion had deployed their best code breakers to trace the anonymous submission, but human computer systems were apparently more secure than anyone had realized. Bounty hunters from a dozen species were searching for the mystery scientist. The Galactic Science Council had offered a reward that could buy a small moon. Dr. Hyunwoo finally managed to establish a secure connection to New Seoul. Getting through to Minho's family took several hours of bureaucratic wrangling, but eventually he found himself speaking directly to Yuna. I need to speak with your brother, he said without preamble. It's about his work on unified field theory. Yuna's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. The equations that were submitted to the Galactic Science Council 3 days ago, Dr. Hyunwoo pressed. I taught Minho for 2 years. I know his mathematical signature as well as I know my own handwriting. There was a long pause. Then Yuna turned the communicator toward the workshop, where Minho was visible making final adjustments to his impossible device. Professor, Minho looked up, surprised to see his old teacher's face on the screen. I thought you were still on Lunar Base. Minho, Dr. Hyunwoo said softly. Do you have any idea what you've done? The entire galaxy is looking for whoever submitted those equations. You've just solved the greatest mystery in galactic science. Minho shrugged, as if revolutionizing physics was something he did every Tuesday. I figured someone would notice eventually. But I wanted to make sure the math actually worked before anyone got too excited. Make sure it worked. Dr. Hyunwoo leaned closer to his screen. What do you mean? Make sure it worked. Behind Minho, Yuna and Jaewon exchanged nervous glances. The prototype device hummed with increasing energy, its crystalline components beginning to glow with an otherworldly light. Well, Minho said with a grin that would have terrified anyone who knew him well. I'm about to turn it on and find out. The emergency session of the Galactic Science Council had drawn representatives from across known space. The massive chamber buzzed with excitement and tension as beings from hundreds of worlds gathered to witness what many were calling the most important scientific moment in galactic history. Floating platforms accommodated species that breathed different atmospheres, while holographic projectors allowed others to attend from their home worlds. Judge Kayla stood on the Dominion platform, his metallic form gleaming under the chamber's artificial suns. Despite the revolutionary equations that had shaken the scientific community, he remained convinced that no inferior species could have produced such work in his mind. This was obviously the result of a Dominion scientist who preferred to remain anonymous for political reasons. We are here to identify the genius behind these remarkable equations, announced Council Speaker Zephyrin, an ancient being whose crystalline body reflected rainbow patterns as he spoke. The anonymous submission has been verified by our greatest minds. We must know who among us has achieved this breakthrough. Dr. Hyunwoo had arrived on the fastest transport from Lunar Base, carrying with him evidence that would change everything. But first, he had insisted on making contact with New Seoul one more time. The communication link crackled to life, showing Minho's modest workshop where the young human was making final preparations for what he called the test. Minho, Dr. Hyunwoo said urgently, the entire Galactic Council is assembled. They're looking for you. This is your moment to show them what humanity can achieve. On New Sol, Minho's prototype device hummed with barely contained energy. The crystalline components glowed brighter as Yuna and Jaewon stepped back to a safe distance. The device itself looked like organized chaos, a mixture of salvaged alien technology and human ingenuity that somehow formed a coherent whole. "Are you sure about this?" Yuna asked, her voice tight with worry. "The math is perfect," Minho replied, his hands dancing over the neural interface controls. "But there's only one way to prove it actually works." Meanwhile, in the council chamber, Dr. Hyunwoo stood to address the assembly. "Honored delegates, I believe I can identify the author of these equations." Judge Kaller's head turned sharply toward the human section. "Dr. Hyunwoo, surely you're not suggesting that a human—" "I am," Dr. Hyunwoo interrupted, his voice carrying across the chamber. "And I can prove it." The chamber fell silent. The idea that a human could have solved the unified field equations was so preposterous to most species that they couldn't even process it. Judge Kaller's laugh echoed like grinding metal. "Impossible," Kaler declared. "Humans are barely capable of maintaining their primitive spacecraft. The idea that one of them could achieve what our greatest scientists have failed to accomplish for centuries is absurd." Dr. Hyunwoo activated his personal holographic projector. "The author's name is Minho. He was my student 2 years ago, and I'm in contact with him right now on New Sol." The communication link expanded to fill the center of the chamber. Suddenly, hundreds of the galaxy's most powerful beings were looking into a cramped workshop where a young human in a neural interface chair was surrounded by what looked like advanced scientific equipment built from spare parts. "Hello," Minho said simply, looking up at the massive assembly without a trace of intimidation. "I understand you've been looking for me." The chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had never agreed on anything were suddenly united in their shock. The melodic chimming of the Velthari reached painful volumes. The Nebula Collective swirled in agitated patterns. Even the stoic Eternal Archivists pulsed with disbelief. Judge Kaller's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "This is ridiculous. A disabled human cannot possibly be responsible for solving the greatest scientific puzzle in galactic history." Minho interrupted calmly. "You're right. It does sound impossible. That's why I built this." His hands moved over the devices. Controls, the workshop filled with a strange, humming energy that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. The crystalline components of his prototype began to glow brighter, and reality around the device started to bend. A small metal sphere that Jaewon had placed on a nearby table suddenly wasn't on the table anymore. It was floating 3 feet away, suspended in a bubble of twisted space-time. The sphere hadn't moved through the air, it had been moved through folded space itself. The council chamber fell completely silent. "Controlled spatial manipulation," Minho explained as if he were teaching a basic physics class. "The equations describe how to create localized distortions in spacetime. This is just a small demonstration. The same principles could move a starship across the galaxy in minutes." Double quotes Dr. Kethva, the Dominion's chief scientist, was staring at his instruments in disbelief. "The energy readings, they're off the scale. He's actually manipulating the fundamental structure of reality." But Judge Kaler wasn't finished. "Tricks, illusions. There's no way a broken human could." His words were cut off as another voice joined the transmission. Admiral Taeyan of the Human Defense Force appeared on a secondary communication channel, speaking from the bridge of a sleek starship that was clearly more advanced than anything the galaxy had seen. "Run humans before," Judge Kaler, the Admiral, said with a smile that held years of suppressed satisfaction. "I think it's time you learn something about humanity that we've kept quiet for far too long." The view shifted to show the Admiral's ship in detail. It was elegant and powerful, its hull incorporating design principles that made even the Dominion's latest vessels look primitive. More ships became visible in the background, an entire fleet of advanced human warships that had somehow appeared without being detected. For the past 50 years, Admiral Taeyeon continued, while you and your allies have been dismissing humans as inferior, we've been quietly developing technologies that your greatest minds said were impossible. Minho isn't unique, he's simply one of many brilliant humans who have been working in secret. The Admiral's smile grew wider. We've been watching your efforts to keep us subjugated. We've seen your systematic discrimination against human students and researchers. We decided it was time to let you know that your attempts at suppression have failed. A new soul. Minho made another adjustment to his device. This time, the spatial distortion was larger, more complex. He reached into the folded space and pulled out a small object that had been sitting on a table across the room. The implications were staggering. Teleportation through spatial folding. He explained, faster than light communication without relay stations, energy generation from quantum vacuum fluctuations. The equations make it all possible. Judge Kayla stood frozen on his platform, his metallic face reflecting the reality that his entire worldview was crumbling. The inferior species he had mocked had just demonstrated technology that made his people's achievements look like children's toys. The young human he had dismissed as defective had solved scientific problems that had puzzled the galaxy's greatest minds for centuries. And he had done it alone, in a workshop built from spare parts, while being systematically excluded from the very institutions that should have been celebrating his genius. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after Minho's demonstration, the galaxy looked completely different. The massive Dominion research station that had orbited New Sol for decades was now being converted into something unprecedented: the Human Galactic Research Institute. What had once been a symbol of alien superiority was becoming a testament to human ingenuity. Minho floated through the station's corridors in his neural interface chair, but now it was surrounded by a shimmering field of controlled space-time distortion. He could move through walls, across vast distances, even between dimensions if he wanted to. The technology that had started as equations in his cramped workshop was now reshaping civilization itself. Status report, he said as he materialized in the main laboratory, where Yuna was coordinating the installation of new equipment that incorporated human innovations with technology from across the galaxy. 17 species have requested formal technology exchanges, Yuna reported, her voice filled with pride. The Velthari want to learn our spatial folding techniques. The Arconians are asking about our quantum communication systems. Even the Eternal Archivists want to understand how we solved problems they've been working on for thousands of years through the laboratory's massive windows. They could see the construction of humanity's first true starships. These weren't the slow, clunky vessels that other species had mocked. They were sleek, elegant craft that could cross the galaxy in hours using Minho's space-folding drives. The sight of them had sent shockwaves through every military in known space. Jaewon's voice crackled over the communication system from the engineering bay. Minho, you need to see this. The prototype city ship is ready for its first test flight. The city ship was humanity's boldest project, yet a massive vessel the size of a small moon that could house millions of people while traveling between galaxies. It represented everything that humans had been told they could never achieve. Now it sat in the construction bay like a gleaming promise of the future. Take us out to the test range. Minho instructed the ship's AI. The view screen showed stars beginning to move as the city ship prepared for its maiden voyage. What should have been a journey of several hours to reach the designated test area was completed in minutes using the new space-folding technology. Meanwhile, on the Galactic Council's Justice Station, Judge Kayla sat in a detention cell that was nothing like the grand courtroom where he had once held absolute power. The trial for a systematic discrimination against humans had been swift and decisive. Evidence of the Dominion's conspiracy to suppress human advancement had been overwhelming. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that his fate was now being decided by a tribunal that included 3 human Jude. Dispositions that had been created specifically to ensure that such discrimination could never happen again. Dr. Soyen stood before the Galactic Council in the same chamber where she had once fought futilely for human rights. But now she wore the robes of Earth's senior representative, and her words carried the weight of a species that had proven itself capable of reshaping the universe, the proposal before us today. She announced to the assembled delegates is to establish humanity as a founding member of the new Galactic Scientific Alliance. Our research institutes will be open to all species, sharing knowledge freely rather than hoarding it for political advantage. The vote was unanimous. Even species that had once looked down on humans now recognized that cooperation was more valuable than competition. The Dominion, stripped of their technological advantages, had little choice but to accept the new reality. Back on the city ship, Minho was conducting the first full-scale test of his revolutionary drive system, the massive vessel simply disappeared. One moment it was in the test range near New Seoul. The next it was in orbit round a distant star system on the far edge of the galaxy. Travel time, Minho asked. 37 seconds, came the reply from the navigation officer. We just traveled 12,000 light-years in less than a minute. The implications were staggering. The galaxy had suddenly become a much smaller place. Colonies that had been isolated for centuries could now be reached in hours. Trade routes that had taken months to travel could be completed in days. The economic and social changes would be enormous. Dr. Hyun-woo, now serving as the Institute's senior advisor, joined Minho on the observation deck as they watched distant galaxies through the ship's advanced sensors, you know. He said quietly, "When I first met you in my physics class, I knew you were special, but I never imagined you would change the entire universe." Minho smiled, his gaze fixed on the stars. "I didn't change anything, Professor. I just proved that being different isn't the same as being inferior. The galaxy needed to learn that innovation comes from thinking differently, not from being physically perfect." The communication system chimed with an incoming message from Earth. Admiral Taeyeon appeared on the screen, his expression serious but satisfied. "Minho, we're receiving surrender requests from 3 different pirate fleets, apparently. Word has spread about our new defensive capabilities. They'd rather join us than fight us." It wasn't surprising. The same technology that allowed peaceful space folding could also be weaponized in ways that made traditional warfare obsolete. A ship equipped with Minho's drives could appear anywhere, strike with devastating precision, and disappear before the enemy could respond. The galaxy's criminal elements had quickly realized that humanity was no longer an easy target. As the months passed, the changes accelerated. Human colonies that had struggled to survive on the galaxy's frontier became thriving centers of learning and innovation. The Galactic Engineering Academy, the same institution that had rejected Minho, now had a waiting list of students hoping to study under human professors. Judge Kaller's trial concluded with a sentence that was both just and symbolic. He would spend the rest of his extended lifespan working as a maintenance technician on human research stations, learning firsthand about the species he had dismissed as inferior. The galaxy's media called it poetic justice, but for Minho, the real victory wasn't in seeing his former tormentor brought low. It was in watching young humans from across the galaxy arrive at the Institute with dreams of changing the universe. Some walked, some used hover chairs, some had disabilities that other species might consider limitations. All of them burned with the same fire that had driven him to solve the impossible, standing on the observation deck of humanity's greatest achievement. Surrounded by friends who had believed in him when the galaxy had written him off, Minho realized that the real lesson wasn't about superior technology or advanced mathematics. It was about the power of refusing to accept limitations that others tried to impose. The galaxy had learned that true strength came not from physical perfection, but from the indomitable spirit that drives someone to keep working, keep dreaming, and keep pushing forward no matter what obstacles stand in their way. And that spirit, more than any technology, was humanity's greatest gift to the universe, the ND.